called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. We stand firmly against the war on science that is predicated on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the belief that whatever is natural must be good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. This belief has become an impediment to advances in areas such as human health, social progress, and even environmental progress. In the field of medicine, the appeal to nature fallacy has already led to catastrophic outcomes. Resistance to vaccines threatens public health and the lives of children. The unwarranted resistance to GMOs has not only held back the fight against climate change, but it has also hampered our ability to feed the developing world as well. Campaigns against GMOs have also held back efforts to ward off the deadly Aedes aegypti mosquito, which has killed countless millions as a carrier of disease and plagues. The scientific consensus concerning the safety of GMOs is solidly supported in every major scientific organization across the planet. The only thing green
Okay, everyone, testing. I'm going to test a Microsoft Edge condition which crashed the stream before. Testing. Still good here. I'm going to share screen on Zoom. Testing. Please be aware we are testing. There you see the browser. There we go. Okay. We're safe so far. Okay, the upgrades worked. Thank you, everyone. Please enjoy the pre-roll. We will be live, possibly 5 minutes late today. Sorry for that.
by bringing together the numerous supporters of climate action that have been alienated by mainstream environmentalism's wildly contradictory support for the shutting down of nuclear power plants in the midst of a climate emergency, and welcome them into our ranks. Thank you.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, EcoModder channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, EcoModder Society of North America.
And online at https ESNA.earth. Welcome to the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. We're a modern urbanist environmental organization with a focus on clean energy, housing density, and the application of technology in medicine and agriculture. We are privileged to bring you speakers with a focus on these and other areas in order to show you the future of a prosperous human civilization which preserves the Earth's wild spaces.
On another planet, Let me tell you something, brother, about you and me. There's no such a thing called freedom, just a word they say. Freedom is in heaven, that's where it stays. Just a word they say. Freedom, just a word they say. Let me tell you something about this world I see. With my own two eyes, 20/20 vision. Let me tell you something, brother, about you and me. Just a word they say. Freedom is in heaven, that's where it stays. Freedom, just a word they say. Freedom, just a word they say. Just a word they say. Freedom is in heaven, that's where it stays.
Hello and welcome to the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. I'm Carl Pauls, and today I have Chris Bergen and Wade Allison, and hopefully we will be hearing from Leslie Corrice of the wonderful blog Hiroshima Syndrome. Leslie is a nuclear operator who has many decades in the field. Let's see, I think Gabe sent me a better intro.
I also know his background, so
Go ahead. Why don't you try to introduce him, Chris, while I'm looking for the script.
Yeah, Leslie spent several years in the nuclear navy, I believe on aircraft carriers, not submarines, but he can confirm that. Then he spent some time with the landlocked civil nuclear program, and then he retired from that and became a school teacher for many years, teaching science. And he was among the handful of science teachers who taught a study block on nuclear energy, which we're hoping to change that. But he's a very interesting guy with many stories, and he's into like reenactments of from like a few hundred years ago, like Shakespeare festivals and stuff. He likes to dress up occasionally.
Wonderful. So Leslie runs this blog, which I've brought up on the Twitch. It's called Hiroshima Syndrome, and he covers in-depth news about the aftermath of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. And we can talk a little bit more about that. In the interim, I don't want to sort of eclipse our guest, but we unfortunately had this scheduled, and Gabe is caught up in transit, and we're having trouble communicating with our guest. So here we are. I myself have a bit of familiarity with Leslie's blog, and as well, I have my own local experts who are working on some of the nuclear engineering startups in Washington State, and I'm blessed to have met Reed Tanaka, who is a Fukushima Daiichi responder who worked in the U.S. Navy and responded to the cleanup and the communication for U.S. Naval service members, sort of informing them about the radiation risk and the actual timeline and history of that accident. So there's a lot that I've learned from Reed, as well as from Leslie's wonderful blog.
Mm-hmm. And joining us with Wade Allison, I know after the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, I know he went to Japan directly in the months afterwards and spoke with the Japanese National Press Club to try to fill them in on what to actually be worried about and what was something that wasn't a real concern. So he's also pretty well knowledgeable. He had students from, I believe, from the Fukushima province come to the university with him. I'm not sure if Wade's able to unmute and speak with us a little bit, or maybe he just wants to listen today.
Yeah, yeah, I was muted. I guess
Yes.
the first thing, particularly as a scientist, is to, before the accident, is to study the situation and give a few lectures and write a book on it. And then when the accident happens, you're ready. Well, I did that. And I wrote the book, which came out in 2009.
Which
And
book is
when
that? Is that the
Uh,
Radiation and Reason?
Radiation and Reason, yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, I gave for 20 years. I gave a course of lectures in Oxford to the physics students, and I studied the medicine as well as the physics of what happens when people get radiation, and I sent the students up to do projects in the hospital and so on. It was really good mixing of disciplines. And well, then I wrote a first book on that.
Yeah, the textbook.
It's a student textbook. It's got quite a lot of maths in it. And then I was asked to give a lecture to the alumni in Oxford as to, what have you been doing? So I gave them a lecture about nuclear and what nuclear medicine and so on. And I realized two things. First of all, they had no idea what I was talking about because their education had screened out anything to do with nuclear except what they read in the paper. They didn't. I mean, I'm talking about lawyers and accountants and politicians and people from all sorts of disciplines. And the second thing was, if I get their attention for a bit, it wasn't at all difficult to explain. So I've spent the last, that was in 2006. So I spent the years between now and then putting my maths in my back pocket for a change, which is very difficult because you've got to explain things without maths. It means you've got to tell stories and got to get people's confidence and so on. And so then I got, when I wrote Radiation and Reason, this was, there's no maths in Radiation and Reason. Well, there's graphs and things, but quite simple stuff. Mm-hmm. And that went very well. And then, as I say, then Fukushima happened. And the media didn't know what to do. So, in fact, what happened was that the son of my erstwhile research supervisor in Oxford is a BBC reporter. And he got hold of me and they said, can you do something? I said, but of course. So this is about a week after the accident. And so I wrote a piece and they said, we'll have to give the other side. I said, there isn't another side. There's just one side. There's the science and the panic. And I'm not going to talk about the panic, but I'm going to talk about the science. So I wrote this piece, and the BBC, I think, were very angry about it because they had an editorial anti-nuclear attitude and still have. But it went, and it's still up there, and there's nothing there that I would withdraw. It says that they should have all gone home. 20,000 people died of the tsunami, but that's okay because the Japanese learn about that in school and they know what to do. And education is a wonderful thing, even with dealing with real trouble. But when it came to the radiation, they didn't know anything. The authorities were not prepared for it because they were told it had been legislated that it should never happen. So when I went over there, the horror was the panic, the loss of confidence of Japanese people in science, the loss of confidence in one another, in fact, in the authorities. And in fact, nobody was to blame. It was all due to the heat inside the Earth trying to get out, which incidentally comes from radioactive decay. So it's nuclear in that sense. I tried to explain that to people, but it's what you can't do. I mean, I do a lot of teaching, but you can't teach people when they're frightened. You've got to teach them before that, when they're calm, when they're in school, and so on. So I tried to explain, and in fact, I went over there 4 times altogether, and I spoke to doctors and school teachers and
the press,
local administrators, and so on, and evacuees, people who had become alcoholic, but they managed to get off it, had to leave their homes, and I toured the inside the evacuation zone, and went and saw this chap's farm, which he'd had to leave, hopefully. But that was all crazy. They should have gone straight back. And now they're still panicking about it. And I was right immediately afterwards. Nobody died. Nobody had anything like enough radiation to have any serious accident at all. One person got compensation because the amount of radiation he received, and he died of cancer. And the Japanese legal code says if you die from cancer and you've had more than a certain amount of radiation, then you get compensated. But there was no question of there being any scientific case that, I mean, courts of law, they're not interested in cause and effect. They're only interested in what the law says and whether you qualify or not.
I think that law was written. I think that law was written that if you worked at the Fukushima Daiichi plant for any period of time, regardless of your radiation exposure, and got cancer later, they would pay out. It didn't matter what tiny amount of radiation you received.
And this is even a sort of a historic precedent in all jurisprudence. All legal precedent is based on the idea of what's called if not but for. And what this principle is if I drop a bowling ball on your toe and the resulting infection causes you to lose your leg, then I am liable for your medical care and maintenance for having lost your leg, regardless of any medical malpractice or lack of proper care. It is if not but for that original injury of the bowling ball, of the stubbing your toe, you would not have lost your leg. There are other immediate causes. There's a proximate cause to you losing your leg, and that would be, of course, medical malpractice. But the way that our historic jurisprudence works is that if not but for the original injury, and this is also on shaky grounds scientifically in the case of the compensated Fukushima Daiichi worker's death, that if not but for that radiation injury, they assume that he might not have suffered lung cancer. But of course, we know if you're a smoker, if you're a middle-aged Japanese man in the 2000s, you are fairly likely to have smoked. In fact, that is material to this case. So whether or not it is scientifically verifiable is completely separate from the legal decision. It is if not but for.
And
the law is an ass. And it doesn't even try to protect itself against that accusation. Anyway, what really gets me angry is when people talk about the Fukushima disaster. It certainly wasn't a disaster. You can't have a disaster when, a few people did stub their toe, but that wasn't because a few people drowned in the basement. But nobody died of radiation. Nobody was even hospitalized for a radiation condition, except to find that there wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Could you talk? We know
all about this. We've been looking at radiation for 120 years. Anyway,
couple quick questions for you, Wade. Is it? I think I heard somewhere that you had previously had students from Fukushima at Oxford. Is that correct? So maybe you had some contacts in the province already. Is that true?
I had a You're saying, did I have a contact in the? I had a contact in one of my ex-students, physics students, was and is in Tokyo, and he did a video for me and so on.
Okay.
So I had contacts in Japan.
Okay, cool.
But not in Fukushima.
And instead of focusing completely on Fukushima, tell us about Onagawa. What happened to Onagawa in the aftermath of the tsunami?
I think I might have this one pretty well. There is, of course, a nuclear plant, which is about half the distance from the epicenter of the Tohoku quake. And that is a plant called Onagawa nuclear power plant. And do you have anything on that, Wade?
Look, I mean, when the earthquake, not the tsunami, when the earthquake happened, all of the nuclear plants in Japan shut down. That means to say all of the nuclear fission in all of them stopped. And that doesn't take very long, a few seconds or minutes or something. And what you're left with then is this radioactive decay of the stuff that's already fissioned in the reactor. That's the only thing that so, in fact, all of the reactors failed safe. And the only thing, and all the other ones except Fukushima were able to cool this heat, which is, it starts off at 7% of the reactor output, and then it cooled quite rapidly in a few days. That's right. And if you go back to the creation of or before the Earth was formed, the stuff in the Earth is still decaying from that. So it goes on and on and on, and that's why the Earth's hot inside. And it's it's the radioactivity decay inside the Earth that caused the earthquake and the tsunami. But that's okay, because that's natural radiation. You can kill 20,000 people and they don't mind if it's natural. But if it's unnatural and you don't kill anybody, then they get very worried.
Right.
Sorry, I can't remember the question.
Oh, yeah. So the effects of the Tohoku quake on Anagawa, and from my memory, this plant had a wonderful amount of earthquake reinforcement, and as well, it had a similar exposure to the tsunami. However, they had a better breakwater, a better seawall, and they're a little bit higher up in elevation. Whereas at Fukushima Daiichi, they're very concerned about siting the plant on bedrock, and so the foundation of the plant.
It wasn't the siting of the plant. It was the siting of the emergency diesel generator.
Ah, yes,
which provided them backup power, and that they should have built further up the hill. And in the other places, there are two nuclear plants in Fukushima, Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima Daini. And Fukushima Daini also had, but their I think it got flooded as well, but their emergency generators worked okay. So, but
I think Daiichi also had difficulties, but they were able to pull batteries from their cars.
That's right.
To run the pumps for many hours, and Daiichi wasn't able to do something like that.
Well, they do have a bank. They both plants had banks of dedicated batteries for a emergency backup, and unfortunately, Daiichi's batteries were a bit older. And as well, Daiichi did not have the cabling available to reconnect to the power system. And so that's how we had 3 plants at Daiichi melt down and none melt down at Daini, because Daini had batteries which did not fail. And by the time the batteries were depleted, they were able to reconnect their plants to the grid.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, Daiichi had cabling there, and they were about to hook up to the first plant when that explosion happened, the hydrogen explosion. And that messed up everything. It destroyed possibly some of the electrical cables or the electrical wiring they were using to hook up to the grid, and put them back many hours in rehooking, and that. So they continue to have the second one and the third explosion, but if they'd have been a little quicker on it, in the middle of a disaster, if, right? But if they could have hooked up a little quicker, they might have been able to have avoided those 3 explosions, which were not nuclear explosions. They were more chemical explosions with hydrogen. Because hydrogen does explode on its own without a flame if it's in greater quantities.
I think all these accidents are chemical. They end up by being chemical. The actual chemical. The explosions are at Fukushima. Maybe this is what you said. That were. They were hydrogen explosions. That's right.
Exactly.
Right.
which the plant operators knew was a possibility. And I believe I remember reading an article in HiroshimaSyndrome.com that it was a link to an English language Japanese newspaper article. But if I remember correctly, that they were going to vent that hydrogen out. What they suspected was hydrogen buildup. They were going to vent it out as a preemptive move. But the prime minister heard they were going to do some venting and told them, don't do any venting. I'm going to be there by helicopter in a few hours. And in those few hours, they had that explosion. So indirectly, possibly we could blame the prime minister of the time.
Yeah, okay. Politicians are very bad.
Well, they're not necessarily bad, but they rarely know their science. They shouldn't meddle in emergency disaster stuff when people who know the proper actions to take are recommending that we do the proper actions. They should sit back and say, yes,
Well,
do that, please.
The operators at Fukushima Daiichi did extremely well and were very brave, and I think they deserve a lot of praise, which they haven't got.
Right.
True.
Because, I mean, the truth of the matter is that when you lose your power, you lose your instrumentation, you lose the you don't know what's going on. I mean, what happened at 3 Mile Island was they didn't know what was going on because the instrumentation was not telling them what was happening. And in fact, that didn't go out of control in the same way. But the Fukushima operators were flying pretty blind for quite a lot of the time and in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, talking about being in the dark, I am interested to see this evening that in the UK, we are being told that on Monday, tomorrow, at between 5 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon, they're threatening to cut off the electricity supply because they're relying on the wind, and the wind has decided not to blow. And it's very cold, and the demand is going to be high. They have started up all their standby coal power stations, and so we are going to have a jolly, in fact, the sooner it happens, the better. What we need is to have a really good, cold, no wind situation, and then the politicians are going to realize that they've got to invest in nuclear power because renewables don't work. And if you don't like carbon, then the answer is nuclear. And until that happens, the politicians are not going to know. It's true that Mr. Putin, the one good thing he's done is to put energy up in lights at the top of the agenda. So at least people are thinking a bit about it.
Yep, I can see that point of view. Yes, he's certainly done that.
He's done it in the most ghastly way. But as I say, a better way would be to have a short, just a few days, when suddenly everybody has no electricity and they have to admit that it's because there was no wind, no gas, and well, there will be gas, but not enough of it.
Right.
So watch your news. Sitting over there in the States, you can watch your newspapers tomorrow, and there might be some in the next few days. They're saying that the wind is going to drop.
Yeah, I'm seeing a snow blizzard in northern Ohio right now, near Lake Erie, but there's not strong wind blowing, and there's certainly no sun coming through with heavy clouds and the blizzard of snow blocking even more sunlight. So it's but then Ohio does have I believe 4 nuclear plants here. So
But then you haven't. You see, the earlier Conservative government in the UK, they shut down, they stopped almost all the coal plants. So we haven't really got. I think we've got a couple left of coal plants.
I remember that. I believe they also destroyed some of the railway transportation cars that haul coal, so that they don't have a way to transport large amounts of coal anymore either.
Well, oh, I don't think we should put the politicians in charge of anything.
So we're still trying to get Leslie Corrice on. They're having computer problems, and so I'm trying to provide the Zoom dial-in numbers. While we wait, William has reminded me of the wonderful timeline that Leslie has available. So I'm going to try to get everyone up on our picture-in-picture here.
Yep. I can see it. Yes.
Yeah, and so you should have there's the timeline up, and we can see the timeline on Twitch. And now I think I have everyone in the right spot on our picture-in-picture. There we are. So, so this is discussing the most powerful quake ever recorded in Japan. This is a 9.1 or a 9.2. The epicenter 100 kilometers off the northeast region of Honshu, known as Tohoku. And so this energy reached Onagawa via tsunami about 30 minutes after the earthquake, and 10 minutes later it struck the Fukushima prefectural coast. And on the coast of Fukushima, there's, of course, Daiichi and Daiichi. By the time the tsunami had hit them, all were safely shut down, as we discussed.
Yep.
And so, here's some really good detail. Onagawa was hit by the biggest tsunami. It had a storm surge or a tsunami surge of more than 15 meters. That's like 50 feet high. And the anti-tsunami barrier at Onagawa completely negated the safety impact of that wave. Something else that I had read was that the local townsfolk sheltered in the cafeteria at Onagawa. Really interesting.
Yes. For several
really interesting
days,
detail. Yeah. So at Fukushima Daiichi, the barrier failed, and it did get flooded. So this is the sister plant to Fukushima Daiichi. One each of the emergency diesel generators for units 2 and 4 remained operational. So they did not completely lose their backup generators.
At Daiichi.
Yes. And so then they interconnected those units 2, 4 with 1 and 3. And that the work of those workers, the emergency preparedness did save those reactors. Unfortunately, all connections to the national grid at Fukushima Daiichi were knocked out. And the power should have come from the 14 emergency diesel generators and these DC batteries. Unfortunately, their 18-foot, I think that's 4 meters tsunami height, wiped out those backup generators. Units 1, 2, and 3 were operating, and the other 3 had been shut down. And so we're seeing here the pictures of their basement being flooded. You can see a pickup truck there right between the bars of this railing.
That's insane.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the diesel generators, A and B, are actually below the shoreline. So they're barely above sea level by 10 meters. And so all that mass of water came in and flooded this area completely. And the batteries. So about 4:45 p.m., an hour and a half after the tsunami, some control room instruments for Unit 1 were re-energized. And they did have high-pressure coolant injection going into the reactor. So they had partial cooling, but of course we found that wasn't sufficient to completely save the reactors. And please, if anyone notices a phone dial in, let me know, because that's probably Leslie.
I think one thing I'll mention that there were, if I remember correctly, 2 deaths at Fukushima Daiichi. 2 employees tried to move from one building to another building in those last moments before the tsunami came in, and I believe they were swept away. So that there were deaths there, but it was not related to normal operations of the plant. It was not related to radiation in any way. It was just poor personal judgment in an unusual situation.
Yeah, and in fact, the Amazon Alexa service will use that as the answer to how many people died in the nuclear disaster. But in actuality, the proximal cause of those deaths was the tsunami. And there's many people who will confuse, many anti-nuclear people especially, confuse deaths from the tsunami with deaths due to the nuclear disaster.
Well, if since the employees were probably on the clock, I would say, okay, count those 2 as nuclear deaths, but have an asterisk next to them.
So unfortunately, it looks like we are not going to be able to talk with Leslie Corrice today. So I'm going to go ahead and change our titles. We're going to discuss the Fukushima Daiichi disaster and and do our best. So maybe we'll move on to some present news afterwards. I did a little bit of react yesterday to the news that's going on, and so maybe I'll be able to revisit some of that. We had a wonderful address from Rafael Grossi on the continued security situation in Zaporizhia, and the news there is that there is no news. So, returning to our timeline, there's this continued decision to expand the evacuation zone, and they're detecting, throughout the evening, radiation levels inside Unit 1 are increasing, and so this is when we know cooling has failed and the core is becoming exposed. Pressure inside the inner containment building had risen to 85 psi, also worrying. And as well, this building was isolated. So the turbine hall is procedurally isolated from the steam building. So the generators and the source of that heat, they're isolated. We're not allowed to release steam into the turbine halls when we're in a scram situation. And now with the power failures, it's somewhat difficult to undo that decision. So the plant manager realized the high pressure cooling injection pumping system were no longer doing their job. He had to use lower pressure inside the reactor and containment so that the low pressure pumps could be used. And then they the manager had to wait for permission to commence depressurization of that reactor building. This is I think this is the decision that you're referring to, Wade. Crucial failure in, sort of procedural decision making.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. This is exactly the kind of problem that the Russians are having and the Ukrainians aren't, because the Ukrainians are, their military, allowing people to make decisions on the front line on the line where it's happening, whereas the Russians have a top-down system where decisions are made upstream, where people don't know what's happening down on the ground. So it's the same problem again. But of course, the pressure inside the reactors was due not only to the fact that the heat and the boiling of the water, but also the fact that the steam reacted with the zirconium metal that contained the fuel elements, and when it reacted with them, that produces, as most metals it do with water at sufficiently high temperature, produced hydrogen and zirconium oxide, and that is the hydrogen that actually exploded when it was finally released out into the atmosphere, and you've got a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen, and guess what happens? So it's schoolboy chemistry. It really is.
Yeah, and so that's the point we're getting to here. And it's a delay of 10 to 12 hours at this point between the need to depressurize and the actual beginning of the depressurization. And so we have severe fuel damage and the generation of hydrogen before 3 a.m. And so we're going from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. We have this condition building up and a hydrogen bubble is being formed. So at this point, the high voltage diesel generator had been spliced into the switchboard for Unit 2, and they had started at 3 p.m. the next day, starting to power those systems. Unfortunately, that hydrogen bubble in Unit 1 exploded. And so it blew apart this unreinforced structure. This is the superstructure around the reactor. And so the reactor, unlike some of the conspiracy theorists say on YouTube here, the reactor did not explode. It was the superstructure around the reactor, and the debris from that disabled the emergency generator they had connected to Unit 2. And so we have this almost comedic cascade failure from Unit 1 inhibiting the recovery of Unit 2, and it just rolls down here from there. Unit 2 and 3 were newer. They had more steam-powered emergency cooling systems. But as this sort of progresses, we did not get to a recovery scenario. I'm not going to read through all of this. It's very, very good, detailed stuff. And here's a really important thing. Finally, we get some independent decision-making from the local staff, where we have seawater cooling for Unit 3. Because they had exhausted fresh water, and at this point they realized how serious this disaster was. They're not going to allow their plant to be destroyed by another hydrogen bubble, and so they were doing everything they could at this point. But there's problems with it. Seawater sources were equipment pits and trenches on the sea side of Unit 3, and so they had to move these hoses. But then, unfortunately, they had an explosion at Unit 3. I had also received information from Reed Tanaka, maybe it's a little too much detail here, but that the plant staff did not have complete diagrams for the piping and which external pipes connected to which internal sinks. And so they basically filled the basement with seawater rather than injecting it directly into the cooling system, perhaps choosing the wrong pipe or perhaps not having the best information at the time. And so then Unit 3 exploded and damaged the fire engines feeding cooling water into Unit 2. A horrible domino effect is taking place. Unit 1 damages one backup generator. Unit 3 damages the fire truck. And then Unit 2, 4:30 p.m. on March 12th, we find out that the fuel core is being uncovered. Then fortunately the water is back above the core, and then we find it's becoming uncovered again. Let's see. Irregular, and so here we finally come to it. An irregular cycling of both depressurization and pumping water into the uncovered core continued throughout the night and early morning of March 15th. There was no indication that the core had been recovered with water throughout those tense hours. Suddenly, at about 6 a.m. on March 15th, a large impulsive sound was heard, and it seemed to come from inside Unit 2 containment. And then they say, actually, the sound was judged to later have been a sonic echo from a hydrogen explosion which destroyed the upper 2 stories of Unit number 4. Unit 4 had been shut down for several months, so there was no fuel. It was discovered that during post-accident investigations, the shared air conditioning system with Unit 3 had an open conduit which allowed hydrogen from Unit 3 to flow into Unit number 4. Hydrogen migrated out of the 4th floor air conditioning room and migrated up to the 5th floor refueling deck where it concentrated. That's fascinating. I hadn't read this detail before. So wonderful, like little cascading effects between the plants. Very, very interesting. I need to read more books on this. This is so fascinating to consider all of these little cascading effects. So Leslie Corrice has a ebook, Fukushima, the First 5 Days. It's available on this website, and let's see if I can find the link to that, and I'll post that in chat. Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you, Chris.
Could you briefly go to the accident update site and show like what happened in the past week?
Yeah. Okay, so I can just barely hear you, Chris. We're gonna go to the accident update. And this is the Fukushima accident updates. See if you can change your microphone source, Chris, because I'm having trouble hearing you. So here on Amazon.com, you can get a free ebook. Amazon.com, Fukushima First 5 Days, Leslie Corrice. I think I've got you now, Chris.
Yes, okay.
So what did you want to see on the accident updates?
Just to show people, because Les has been doing this since about a month after the earthquake and tsunami, and just to show people a taste of what he's been doing week by week for over a decade now. So maybe just highlight a couple of these stories that happened in the last month.
Yeah, 136 pages of coverage. So really impressive work here. Really wonderful coverage. Unfortunately, we're rescheduling our talk with Leslie Corrice, but yeah. So
Okay.
latest updates from January. That's from this month. Tokyo's High Court upholds the acquittal of 3 TEPCO executive concerning the 2011 accident. The courtroom called them not guilty of professional negligence. All were formally acquitted in 2019 by Tokyo's district court. And so this is, a case following the decision that they are not culpable. Of course, that's disappointing to some folks. But that's the system of jurisprudence is sometimes very easy on on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a correction of shoddy storage of radioactive material. Correcting allegedly shoddy storage of the radioactive material will cost JAEA $280 million. And so there's a story here talking about the 800 transuranic waste containers.
Right. And that would be the JAEA, Japanese Atomic Energy Agency. And Les does a really wonderful job. Apparently there are several newspapers that publish English version news articles over in Japan. And so Les has been combing through those every week, finding things having anything to do with nuclear or radiation in Japan.
We're finally about to see the release of the treated water. And so we have this water which is being cycled through the reactors through a multi-stage filtration system. And we've seen a delay over releasing this water into the ocean. It's less radioactive than ocean water is these days, because especially water that may be on the coastline. But of course, there is this irrational fear because of things we can't filter out of that water. Tritium is the only substance we're absolutely not able to filter out of the Fukushima Daiichi cooling water. Every other substance, we're able to remove through chemical and filtering methods, but tritium.
It's hard to separate water from water. Yes.
Yeah, it's a isotope of hydrogen, and so that hydrogen is bound into water molecules. So he's saying here, the distrust of the essentially harmless discharge remains strong with local fisheries operators and nearby countries. And we know, of course, that South Korea regularly discharges water with tritium in it. That is activated water that has gained an extra neutron from the process of cooling that nuclear reaction. Eventually makes its way out of the plant, but of course it's essentially harmless. You have to consume pure tritiated water before it starts to become a problem for human beings, or nearly pure tritiated water. He has a great chart on this site. And here it is. This level of LD50 in mice, 37 billion becquerels per liter.
Yeah, and these articles can be found on the left-hand side of the blog here.
I'm not gonna link directly to this. YouTube is giving me a lot of hassle with regards to URLs that show up in the chat. So you might find that you're not able to see the URLs that are sent to YouTube, and in fact, I think Restream Bot might have been given a stern warning for the Amazon.com link that I sent to YouTube. So thanks for that, Google. Don't be evil now, Google. But an Amazon.com book, again, Fukushima, The First 5 Days, Kindle edition, completely free on Amazon.com. This is not something that should be actionable on Google, but yet they're being ultra conservative with allowing me to post links on my own channel. But yeah, this is the level of concern for tritium is, of course, extremely low. If the LD50 is 37 billion, chromosome aberrations at 110 million becquerels per liter, no detectable cancer. This means that it's less than 100 millisieverts at a level of 37 million becquerels per liter. And the drinking water standards for Finland and Australia down in the tens of thousands. Drinking water standard for Canada at 7,000 becquerels per liter. And the drinking water standard for the United States at 740 becquerels per liter. 100 times the background level. So if go ahead. Yeah.
Can I add, if you actually put the nuclear physics into this, tritium is extraordinary because per decay, per becquerel, there's less deposited energy. It's the softest, smallest energy per decay of any radioactive decay. So if you talked about the actual energy involved, it's very, very small. And in fact, all of us have radioactivity inside us of potassium-40, which is perfectly normal, and indeed carbon-14. And that is that's right, 5.7 keV. That's tiny compared with an MeV of a typical radioactive decay and 200 MeV of a fission thing. So it is... Okay, there you are.
Yeah, so compare that to cesium-137.
Yeah. Cesium-137 is about the same as potassium-40. Potassium-40 is inside us all the time. We got several thousand radioactive potassium-40 decays, and that's all the time. It's like an MeV or so. That's right.
It's night and day. These are, we're measuring in nearly a megatron electron volt for potassium-40 for cesium, and over 1 MeV for potassium, and nearly half to 1 MeV for cesium. And so this is less than 1/100th of the power of a cesium decay. And they happen much more frequently because that half-life is so short. It's a 12-year half-life. And so those decays happen, I think, on average 2 to 3 times as frequently as the 30-year half-life of cesium. But of course, the molar mass, I think, let's see, what's the molar mass of water is a little higher than the density, higher molar density of water compared to cesium. So you'll have to do a lot of math to really understand the difference. That means the atoms are more tightly packed, the molecules are more tightly packed in one rather than the other, and so your relative dose is quite different. The other thing to note here, and my favorite fact about cesium is a salt. It gets into our bodies, it sticks to submarines and aircraft carriers, and so it gets into everything. It's very biologically mobile. It's so problematic compared to tritium, which passes through the body. Tritium and water, hydrogen, does not stick around in the body. It goes right through you. It has a biological half-life of about 3 days. So it is night and day, the effects of tritium versus the other actually worrying nuclides like cesium-137. I'm going to get us back to just a chat here. So thank you everyone for hanging around. We've we've been on our podcast for about an hour and just sort of talked about various topics. So I will. There, we got the camera out of the way. So again, we're gonna have to reschedule our chat with Leslie Corrice. It's a very important topic, and so we hope to bring you a conversation with Leslie Corrice. And as well, next week, we're going to have another great guest. I'll have to look that up, and we're going to make a Facebook event. So I think that we should be live on Facebook now at the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. So we hope to see you here on Facebook as well. I'm going to double check that we actually are live. Yeah, we're live. We have one viewer on Facebook. So wonderful to see you, Facebook people. And we're going to go to commercial, and we're going to find a friend of the channel to raid on Twitch. So again, my name's Carl. Thank you for our recovered program discussion on the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. And we'll be live again next week at this time with a new guest. We'll be rescheduling Leslie Corrice for a time in the future. Eco-Modernist Channel Live appears on YouTube every week, Sunday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, on twitch.tv at Soyatl. We are live today on FC2, reaching out to our friends in Japan to bring them news and information about the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. And we'll be live on Trovo, DLive, and I think I'm also live on Twitter and LinkedIn today. So thank you all for checking us out, and let's have a good week. And remember, keep the mission first. Peace and justice will follow.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources,